بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله رب العالمين والحمد لله الحمد لله كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. ربنا لك الحمد، لك الشكر، لك الملك، إليك يرجع الأمر. أنت نور السماوات والأرض، أنت قيوم السماوات والأرض، أنت الحق ووعدك الحق، ولا إله إلا أنت. ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأهل بيته وأصحابه ومن اتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We always start by praising God, praising Allah, the truth and the light of the heavens and the earth. Allah, you are the anchor, you are the pillar of the truth, you are the light that illuminates the darkness on this earth and in the heavens. Without you, we are lost. Without you, we have no anchor and no place. And we praise and pray for blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his family and his companions and all those who have followed him sincerely with faith till the hereafter. Alhamdulillah that there was a considerable reaction to the last khutbah. But every reaction, regardless of how positive it is or negative, is an invitation to reflect and think. The nature of knowledge, the nature of the search for all that is divine and majestic is that we never rest in place with a lazy confidence in certitudes that are unchallenging to us. A Muslim, a believer, is an intelligent human being. And the nature of intelligence is that it despises and rejects indolence and rejects comfort that leads to laziness. The nature of intelligence is that it always searches. This is why, for instance, one of the early jurists of Islam, Ibn Mubarak, who has a famous musnad, had a statement that he would often repeat: لا يزال المرء عالما ما طلب العلم فإذا ظن أنه قد علم فقد جهل. The person remains worthy of descriptive characteristic of a scholar or even a jurist. As long as they seek after knowledge, but once they believe that they've reached knowledge, then they become an ignorant human being. They are no longer a scholar. The nature of scholarship, the nature of ilm, the nature of the pursuit is that you never rest on your laurels and never assume that you know. And each stage of knowledge is simply an invitation for a further and more intense search for all that you do not know. And a student of knowledge will always find that that which they do not know is a great deal more than what they do know. Now, I mention all of this as a segue to a critical issue. We live in a day and age where Muslims around the world, especially in the Middle East, are recolonized through very clear and obvious processes of domination and subjugation. But they are recolonized politically, economically, militarily, and most important, intellectually. Muslims around the world are recolonized by carefully negotiating who is in power that can act as a proxy to control the Muslim masses so that they do not challenge, and picking my words very carefully, that they do not challenge the racist paradigms of the elite of the world. The elite of the world, whether they are white in skin or not white in skin, they are white in culture. The elite of the world is a racist elite. It's an elite that since the 16th century has dominated darker-skinned human beings through fundamentally and deeply racist paradigms. In the 17th century, there emerged the so-called science of forensic anthropology that for the first time in human history, divided human beings into races. The Negroids, the Caucasians, the Mongoloids, and so on, and forget the fourth. This was a major step in human history because it was not simply a scientific venture. It was a scientific claim, an attempt to divide human beings racially so that the white race, the Caucasians, can create a monopoly over all the beautiful attributes of humanity, rationality, virtue, morality, reason, and can attribute to the non-white race everything that is demeaning and degrading. Irrationalism, despotism, etc., etc. This racial logic was thoroughly supported by legal institutions. So all you need to know, for instance, that until very late. Until 1965, Muslims could not be citizens of the U.S. Until 1954, race was still a grounds for exclusion in the U.S. And until this very day, national quotas are a thinly camouflaged system of racism to maintain the racial purity of the US and Europe. So Muslims are colonized. When you see the invasion of Western corporatism and money markets into the heart of Mecca and Medina, you must realize that Muslims are colonized. When you see that the workers and the engineers that worked for the Bin Laden group that designed Mecca, the expansions in Mecca, and are designing the further expansions in Mecca, you must realize that Muslims are colonized. When you see American officials intervening in the school programs that are taught in the Muslim world, and that dictate whether Muslims are worthy of democracy or human rights, again, Muslims are colonized. This is a reality, but there is a further type of colonization that is far more sinister in our day and age. The colonial enterprise of Islamophobia. Because Islamophobia is deeply sinister in being able to penetrate the hearts and minds of Muslim youth, our children and our future generations, and implant in them so many seeds of doubt that they are presented with a fundamental option. Either they attempt to use their intellect, but the Islamophobes have succeeded in convincing their psyches that if they use their intellect, they will inevitably have to end up accepting the conclusions of the Islamophobes, or they have to put their intellect aside and join the ranks of the dummies of Islam. And what I mean by the dummies of Islam, those who do not live in our contemporary world in any real sense, because they live by a literal reading of texts, traditions, which they do not understand, but they try to mimic and ape. This situation that we are in creates enormous challenges for us. Just this week, 9 young men were executed in Egypt. There is no question, and all of us know, that these people were tortured, confessions were obtained, they had nothing to do with the crime for which they were charged and convicted, and the executions were completely unjust. It would be just another incident of injustice in Muslim land in the days of colonial hegemony, which brought the Egyptian government to power, because the Egyptian government serves the interests of Israel and Saudi, etc. And so who cares about human rights or democracy for any part of the Muslim world as long as they play along their colonial role, perform their colonial role? It would be that, except for a very telling thing. Dar al-Ifta al-Masriya, the institution responsible for fatwas in Egypt, the authority on ifta in Egypt, when it saw a widespread anger around the world about the unjust and unfair execution of these 9 people, Dar al-Ifta knows that it is complicit in the murder of hundreds and hundreds of souls, because according to Egyptian law, if someone is sentenced to death, the sentence is sent to Dar al-Ifta for Dar al-Ifta to issue an advisory opinion as to whether the execution is per Sharia or against Sharia. And Dar al-Ifta approved the execution of these 9 people, and in fact, since that procedure was created by the British in the 1800s, Dar al-Ifta has never opposed an execution, including the execution of someone like Sayyid al-Qutb. But Dar al-Ifta went a step further. Not only did they approve the execution, but shortly after, when they saw the anger and outrage at the murder of these young people, they engaged in Islamophobia. They put up an image of a man wearing a jalabiya and beard, talking to someone wearing trousers and a shirt, and said, "Beware of the terrorists. Don't let them fool you." So the beard and jalabiya have become an image for terrorism, and the shirt and trousers have become an image for reasonableness. If Muslims themselves, if this is not evidence of complicity in Islamophobia, I don't know what is. When the King of Saudi or the Crown Prince of Saudi stomps upon the Kaaba like a donkey, him and his friends stomping upon the Kaaba, 1400 years no one ever dared to do it. What can be more proof of the internalization of Islamophobia, that this person is so alienated from his tradition that he doesn't realize when you go to the Kaaba, the minute you come close to it, you start shaking from reverence. This man had no reverence because he was raised as an Islamophobe. What could be further proof of the internalization of Islamophobia into our culture? Dar al-Ifta al-Masriya didn't just put this image up, but issued a long declaration after the execution of these 9 innocent children, all of them were in their 20s, that reminded everyone that we Muslims must be vigilant in fighting the Muslim Brotherhood, because the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization, and so by implication is saying, you know, don't pay too much attention for whether these confessions were obtained under torture. You know, don't pay too much attention for what human rights organizations are saying about the way these people were convicted and put to death. Don't pay too much attention to their age. Don't pay attention to the heartbroken mothers. Don't pay attention to anything, because we have an obligation to wage jihad against the Muslim Brotherhood. So by implication, well, these are Muslim Brotherhood kids, which, again, there's no evidence they were. But even if they were, it doesn't matter. And that, you know, this is just part of the war that we are waging against quote-unquote political Islam. Isn't this an internal colonization of the Muslim psyche and the Muslim mind? Isn't this a complicit construction of Islamophobia within Muslim cultures, to the heart and to the helm? Now, why do I say all of this? Because once again, we are reminded that the institutions of religiosity that are coming from dictatorial and despotic countries are marred in hypocrisy, that their credibility do not stand to scrutiny. And we, Muslims in the West, must not look to these institutions for authority or guidance, and must be vigilantly aware that the hypocrisy that has been implanted in their hearts can easily be implanted into the hearts of those who come from them as figures of authority in the West. You don't leave your hypocrisy at the door just because you came to the US. Once you are a coward, you are always a coward. Once you learn to kiss up to those in power in Egypt or Saudi or the Emirat, the rot of hypocrisy is in your heart, and your face becomes egotistical and narcissistic and self-focused, because you lose touch with Allah. Allah in your heart teaches you courage and the power of defiance, even if the cost is everything. But once you learn to be a coward, placing Allah in your heart is very difficult. And your faith becomes an exercise in egoism and narcissism and self-promotion. And then you become like a parasite that feeds off the disempowerment of other human beings because of the fundamental psychological flaw within you as a human being of having compromised your own sense of integrity and autonomy and power. أقول هذا وأدعو الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. There are specific steps. One, if you learn to be cautious about contexts that produce immorality, you must recognize something that is foul when it exists. And what is happening in countries like Egypt and Saudi and the Emirat is foul to the core. And so you must be suspect. I'm not saying that you must exclude. I'm saying that you must be suspect of those who have been anchored in this culture and come to you proposing to teach you your Islam. That's number one. Number two, no, and here if I open this door, I would go on forever. That no religion honored the intellect more than Islam. As we know from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Allah has not created something more revered to Allah than reason, al-aql. The Islamic tradition, the prophetic tradition, is full of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which al-aql, reason, is described as da'amat al-mu'min, the steadfast support, uplifting support of a believer. Aql elsewhere is also described as su'dad al-mu'min, matiyat al-mu'min, iddat al-mu'min. All of these expressions are reminding Muslims that reason, the intellect, whether it is da'ama, su'dad, matiyya, udda, it's all of them are saying that this is your pillar of support. That the intellect wasn't created so you can put it on a shelf as you're reading text. If the Prophet ﷺ said, وَهَلْ يَنْفَعُ القُرْآنُ دُونَ عِلْمٍ, that even the Quran, if you read it irrationally or read it without applying the rigors of the intellect, it does no good. So for those Muslims who think that they simply can read a hadith, put their intellect and their reason on the shelf, and voila, you have your Islam. And especially when the hadith that they read is referred to them by those people who have had the hypocrisy of despotism implanted in their hearts, what do we expect? All the time, converts are complaining about how ugly things are. The ugliness is understandable. It comes from the hypocrisy of despotism. But we can create beauty when you liberate yourself and you know that Allah has given you the gift of reason. So one is to glorify and sanctify and reify the gift of reason within you. It is not there to be denied. It's there to be nurtured and nourished. Second, talabul ilm. And again, these could be subjects of many khutbahs. But the seeking of knowledge if one just dipped a little, just a little, in the value that Islam has placed on the obligation to seek knowledge, think about a hadith that you no longer hear in the modern age. the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet says, إن أكثر الناس أمانا يوم القيامة أكثرهم فكرا. Those who will be the most secure in the hereafter are the most reflective, are those who use أكثرهم فكرا في الدنيا, that those who spent life on earth reflecting. There's another hadith. ما من آدم إلا وله ذنوب ولكن من كان غريزته العقل وسجيته اليقين لم تضره الذنوب لأنه كلما أذنب تاب واستغفر وندم. All human beings sin. This is another hadith. But those whose rational faculties are well developed, thinking abilities are well developed, need not fear sinning, because their rational faculties are such that even when they sin, their conscience wakes up and calls them back to reason. When you have hadiths from the Prophet ﷺ, and again, one can just كلمة من الحكمة يتعلمها الرجل خير له من الدنيا وما فيها. A single word of hikmah, of wisdom, that a human being learns is more worthy to Allah, to Islam, than the entire earth and what's in it. We are a religion that tells that basically is telling people, you who reflect, you who use your reason, you who are not simply puppets be moved by strings, you who do reject living a life of subjugation to other human beings because God glorified you, you are what Allah wants. Not these subservient, obedient, broken, dishonored, undignified human beings that we see all over the world. That's not what Allah wants. So, one, knowing what you should be suspicious to. 2, glorify your reason. 3, be vigilant in pursuing knowledge. And 4, know that Allah has created people with different abilities and different talents. Among those that you should be distrustful of are the pretenders. Those whose talent is in medicine or engineering, but love to play Muslim jurist. Or a Muslim jurist who loves to play the role of a medical doctor. Immediately know that these are people who have ego issues. They're not at peace with themselves. People, Islam is too serious, too honorable, to be left as extracurricular activity. Islam is not extracurricular activity. In despotic countries, you don't let your children specialize in the study of Islamic intellectual tradition because it could lead to their disappearance in prison. So you tell your children be doctors and be engineers and be computer scientists. But the fact that in the West, our thought about Islamic history, theology, and philosophy comes from people who are busy making a living most of the time and doing Islam on the weekends is offensive to the core. With all due respect, you surgeon, you medical doctor, you businessman, you stock trader, you whatever your business is. In the modern world, knowledge, systems of knowledge require specialization and dedication. You go do your job and do a fine, put your effort in excelling in your job. If you want to do something, support those who have dedicated their lives for the study of the tradition. So seek those with the dedication to knowledge. But ultimately, when you ask them anything, ask yourself always, is what they have given me, does it lift them at my expense? This is a necessary litmus test for any fatwa you hear. Does that fatwa, in legal terms we call it constitute a conflict of interest, does that fatwa give them something, whatever, it doesn't have to be material, it could be even authority, it could be power, at my expense? Are they basically speaking from a conflict of interest position? Because if they are, then again you say, I have reasons to suspect and I need to study this more. If they aren't, then you can start considering what they've said. Inshallah, in further khutbahs, I will try to set out this methodology that is pressingly necessary for Muslims in the West to be the ray of hope, inshallah, hopefully, for the entire Muslim ummah that has been recolonized, re-subjugated, re-dominated in the most grotesque and ugly way. We Muslims in the West have a heavy obligation upon our shoulders. We are called upon to lead the ummah, not, forget military, all of that is nonsense. Leading today is through information and ideas. Those who are on top are those who have a heavier bank account of ideas and who monopolize meaning or epistemology in the world. That's the power in the modern world. Those who get to define the terms control the language, and those who control the language control everything. Allahumma afu anna waghfir lana wa aminna ya Rabb واهدنا سواء السبيل وصراط المستقيم وانصر الإسلام واهدي المسلمين. Allah, grant us wisdom, grant us the sirat so we know your path. Allah, give us the strength to endure these trying times. Forgive the many people who have been murdered unjustly and martyred unfairly. Give patience to their family and give strength to their loved ones. And Allah guide us so that these days, so that our children and grandchildren can have better days ahead of them. Wa aqim as-salam.